Hey guys, and welcome to another video on my channel. Today I'm going to talk about something a little bit more serious and something I'm not actually used to talking about in great detail. I've never been shy about my condition, but I've never really talked about the details. Right out of the gate, get it right out there. I am bipolar, and not like totally bipolar. I am actually bipolar. I have bipolar disorder. The specific diagnosis is bipolar-nos, or bipolar not otherwise specified. And all that means is that my bipolar disorder doesn't meet the same criteria as bipolar A or bipolar B. I am currently great. I am well treated, I am medicated, and I have had wonderful therapy. But it has been a long, arduous road to get to a point where I am okay. So let me talk a little bit about the last 10 years, essentially, and even to a lesser extent as a teenager. Now that I have a diagnosis of bipolar, I can pretty much safely say that I have been bipolar probably since puberty, but it wasn't something that was on anyone's radar. I mean, most people just think teenage girls are crazy anyways. And I'm sure that to a certain extent, teenage girls are just a little bit crazy. But in my case, it was certainly mental illness. I am deeply ashamed of some of the stuff that I put my family through when I was a teenager. I was bipolar. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. I was emotionally unstable, and that only got worse after I had my children. Which I hate to even say that, because my children are the light of my life. I love them. They are the greatest things that I have ever done or could ever have. But it was definitely having them that pushed my mental illness into the spotlight. So let me go back to when I was a teenager. Now, a lot of teenagers have, you know, periods of depression and just self-doubt and are really insecure. I can remember I was sad a lot. I felt like nobody really understood me. I felt like I was angry a lot, and I was super sad all the time. It would take nothing to throw me into tears. I had trouble maintaining friendships because all friendships would just be wrought with jealousy and envy and just confusion and doubt. So, I mean, it was very difficult for me to relate with other people, simply because I always doubted whether or not they liked me. I thought that I was a burden on people. I thought that I was overly sensitive or too emotional, and that I took things too seriously. That's just how I felt. I was essentially gaslighting myself. Instead of just accepting that there could have been a treatable mental illness happening, I just assumed that I was broken and that nobody would ever care about me, and that even the people that did care about me were just pretending so as not to hurt my feelings. And now let's move ahead into adulthood. For the most part, I don't associate college with the worst of my mental illness. I know it was there, I know I went through periods of depression, but for the most part, I just focused on school and I powered through, and it wasn't until adulthood and specifically when I had my children that the bipolar became very apparent. Now, unfortunately, after the birth of my son, it was misdiagnosed as postpartum depression. It was a step forward. It was my first experience getting treated for some sort of mental illness. It was entirely the wrong direction to go, though. Postpartum depression, or depression in general, is not bipolar. Being on medication for postpartum depression actually made the bipolar disorder worse, because if you're on the wrong medication for bipolar disorder, the symptoms can go through the roof, and it can make you feel like you're losing control. I was never a danger to myself or others. Never. I never had destructive thoughts, and I never had any suicidal thoughts or anything like that. Now, I did frequently think no one would care if I wasn't here, and that if it wasn't for the fact that somebody needed to be here to care for my children, I could get up and go and no one would even notice. Obviously, this wasn't the case, but mental illness, it lies to you. It lies to you constantly, and it makes you doubt everything. So I had postpartum depression, or at least that's what I thought. It could have been postpartum depression, but more than likely it was just that all the hormones from pregnancy and post-pregnancy and breastfeeding made the bipolar disorder even worse. So anyway, I was treated for postpartum depression. I was put on Prozac, and that was that. I didn't see a psychiatrist, I didn't see a therapist. I went to my family doctor, she said this is what it is, she gave me the medication, and I took it. And honestly, it helped a little, and by helped, I mean I didn't feel out of control. Unfortunately, I didn't feel anything. Like, I felt numb constantly, just emotionally nothing. I went through the motions a lot. I did things because that's what you're supposed to do as a new mom. And then when I had my second child, it was even worse. So again, I went to the doctor after I had my daughter, and I told her I'm pretty sure the postpartum depression is back. She put me back onto Prozac again, and that was the end of that. Now, I knew at this point that Prozac was the wrong treatment, but I was also kind of ashamed. I mean, obviously it's ludicrous, but I was ashamed of myself that I couldn't just pull it together. You know, like so many people are parents, so many people deal with postpartum depression. People just, they hold it together, and I was like, there's something wrong with me because I can't just hold it together. So I stopped taking the Prozac, which, I mean, the Prozac was a wrong choice to start with, but you should never just stop mental illness medication. That's not recommended at all. It's incredibly dangerous, and you should not do it. But I did, and I stopped probably when my daughter was about 8 months old. I was never a danger. I was safe, I was attentive, I was always there for my children. But I was just emotionally unstable. I was quick to anger. I would be very emotionally raw. I was practically incapable of handling emotions or even express them in any sort of healthy way. Now, let's move on to when I had my third child. When my second daughter was born, I was expecting the depression. I knew it was going to come, and I was on the lookout for it. Now, it didn't really hit me until she was about, I'm gonna say 2 to 3 months old. And it hit me like that. I don't know what happened, but I went to bed one night and I couldn't sleep. I was convinced out of nowhere that my daughter was going to die of SIDS. Convinced. Like, this wasn't something like I worried about or was anxious over. This was something I knew was going to happen. She was going to die of SIDS. And the only way that that could be prevented was by me staying awake and holding her. And not just anyone holding her, it had to be me. There were times when my husband would be holding her across the room and I'd be doing something, and I would still, every few minutes, say, can you check her and make sure she's breathing? Because I was convinced. It didn't matter if she was sleeping, it didn't matter if she was awake, it didn't matter if she was doing tummy time, or I had her, or she was breastfeeding, or whatever. She was going to die, and I needed to make sure she didn't. It was irrational, it was illogical. That's the way it was. So I got to the point where I had not slept in probably about 4 days. And I called my husband at work in a fit of sobs because I was like, I can't do this, there's something wrong with me, and I'm so concerned about this. And it wasn't just that I was concerned about her anymore, it was that I was concerned about me. So he came home and I took myself to the emergency room, and even then I was calling him on the cell phone to make sure that she was still alive, because I didn't trust him to keep her alive. So when I was at the hospital, they again saw what was happening and said, this is just more of the postpartum. They gave me a prescription for the Prozac and sent me on my way, and I took that Prozac for almost a year, and I don't remember Allie's first year. At this point, so it was the third time I had been on Prozac, it wasn't just that it made me emotionally numb anymore. It erased her entire first year. I don't remember it. I can look back at pictures now of her first year, and I'm like, I don't even remember being here. There are pictures of us with all 3 kids at the zoo, and I'm like, I do not remember going to the zoo. I don't remember anything about her first year, and I'm so glad that I've got pictures and video. I've got tons of video because that's what I did. I took tons of video of her first year. And I'm so glad I did, because the memories are gone. The memories that I do have are incredibly fuzzy, but for the most part, they're just not there. So when it was close to her first birthday, I went to the doctor and I said, this is not working. Prozac is not helping. It's making me feel awful. And then I started to describe what I actually was feeling. I described how I was always quick to anger, and that it wasn't just an anger, but a visceral rage that when I feel anger or even frustration, it's not just that I'm like, oh shucks, I'm angry today, or oh goodness, that's frustrating. It's any little thing makes me feel absolute physical rage. Like that feeling in the pit of your stomach that I can't even describe it with words. It was the kind of thing where I would shake and my fists would clench, and it's not even that I wanted to like hurt anything or anybody. It was that I felt the rage in my body. I felt it physically. And I mean, not just that, there were times when I was incredibly sad and I don't know how to, desperate, just desperate. It wasn't even sadness. I don't know how to describe this in such a way that is understandable for somebody who doesn't have bipolar. Just absolute despair. I think that's the major one, is that I would often go between, you know, like feeling normal and level, and then total and complete visceral rage to utter and complete despair. Now, that's just me. I don't know how other people feel it. For me, the major part of bipolar is going back and forth between rage and despair. I didn't really experience a lot of the manic happiness that some people get, but I would definitely have periods of impulsiveness. I've got a embarrassing collection of craft supplies because I'll get an idea in my head and just run with it, and then I'm done. You know, like I'm impulsive, and it manifests itself in crafts. But for the most part, I would go back and forth between total guttural rage and utter despair. And despair would be the biggest one, where I would feel like I was in a rut, and that nothing was ever going to get better. Nothing was ever going to, nothing was going to be terribly bad either, but that I would just be stuck in this nothingness forever. And I was just in complete and total despair at my life, that this is just how it is. I'm going to be miserable, and I'm going to have poor control over my emotions. So I described all that to my doctor, and she said, you know what? I think that we have been treating this wrong all this time. I'm pretty sure that what you're describing is bipolar disorder. And I had never even considered it at that point. So when I thought about it, I was like, that doesn't sound right, because bipolar, it's the people who go crazy manic happy and then completely depressed and suicidal, and I didn't feel like that was me. And then she referred me to a psychiatrist, and when I spoke with her, she's like, those aren't the only kinds of bipolar. There's this other one called bipolar-nos, and I fit that description. Not just that, but rapid cycling bipolar-nos. Because some people, when they have bipolar, they go through these periods of depression or anger, like manic hyperactivity, and each one of those states of mind can last weeks or months. Like, it can last a long time. You can be in a depressive state. Me, I can run through the gamut in a day. Like, I can go from feeling normal to complete and utter rage within minutes, and then be back to normal again. So she put me on Lamictal, and I'm telling you right now, that drug is a godsend. I have never felt so in control in my entire life. Now, it was a little bit of a process. They put me on a small dose, and then they wanted me to step it up and then step it up again. And I found that when I stepped up too much, it brought the rage on really hard, and I couldn't control it at all. So I stepped myself back down, and now I'm at a point where I'm on a nice low dose of Lamictal, or lamotrigine, whatever you want to call it, and I'm level. I feel fantastic. I went to therapy, and I learned coping mechanisms. I've finally gotten to the point now where even when the drugs aren't perfect, because sometimes just being a woman, you've got hormonal cycles, and sometimes the drugs aren't strong enough to compensate for the hormonal changes that happen from month to month. But I've learned coping mechanisms. I've learned to, like when I feel the rage, and I can say to myself, this isn't real rage, this is the bipolar talking, and then I can breathe through it, and I can bring my anxiety levels back down. And it's just, therapy and medication has changed my entire life. I've been working through this now. My diagnosis I got about 18 months ago, and I've been working through it, and I'm finally at a place where I feel not just okay, but actually happy and content, and just, I feel like I'm a good mom and a better wife and just a good citizen again, and I feel like a normal person. I feel like what I thought other people felt like. The best thing to come from this diagnosis is that I can now be on the lookout for it in others. Bipolar disorder is genetic. It's got a hereditary component to it. So I can look to my children now in the future, and if I see signs, I can help get them treatment right away. They don't have to live for 20 years wondering if they're normal or broken or in any sort of despair. I can tell them, like, this is the signs to look for, and here is how we are going to get treatment for it, so that they can live their best life right from the time that it becomes an issue. I can be empathetic to other people who are dealing with this. I mean, mental illness is everywhere, and it's stigmatized, and it shouldn't be. It's no different than having diabetes. You shouldn't be ashamed to want the best health for yourself, whether it be physical or mental. We need to support each other. Alright guys, that's pretty much it for this video. I know it's kind of all over the place, but that's just how my brain works when I'm thinking about my mental illness. So if you have any questions about bipolar disorder, bipolar-nos, cognitive behavioral therapy, or anything like that, leave them in the comment section below and I'll do my best to answer them. If you like this video, give it a great big thumbs up, share it if you'd like to, and we are going to put out a video every day for the next year, and I'd like you to join me for that, so go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I'll see you next time, guys.